The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep, open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shayn, and today for you guys, I have a guest who hasn't been on the show since episode number 45, so I feel like it was long awaited, and she definitely needed to make her return to dive into some more of the fascinating stuff that she's been getting into since last time she was on the show. But I think you guys will definitely enjoy this conversation, diving a bit more into the spiritual realm today, of course. But before we get into today's show, just have a couple of quick news and updates. First and foremost, for anybody that didn't catch it on the last couple episodes, I did drop 2 brand new designs over there on the Open Minds Media merch store. One of which is this campfire design where you got Sasquatch and you got an alien, one of them smoking a joint, one of them sipping a beer, just hanging out around the campfire, no text or anything like that. I thought the design really didn't need it, but I think you guys will definitely enjoy that one. And for the people that are more on the conspiratorial crowd, I also have a new design that says break the mind control, and it's got these marionette hands with a hypnotic pattern behind it, trying to add a little bit more diversity over to the Open Minds Media merch store, as I mentioned. So hopefully you guys enjoy these designs, and there might be some new ones hopefully coming in the future, diving into a little bit more away from just the podcast designs in particular. But if you guys want to possibly even snag one of those new shirts for free, I am doing a t-shirt giveaway. It is a survey that you guys fill out, and then you guys will be entered to win a free t-shirt. Once we hit 50 entries, that's when I'm going to use a random number generator and pick a winner, and the winner will get any t-shirt of their choice from the Open Minds Media merch store, of course. But the survey is to hopefully help the show grow and improve, so anybody that does that, I definitely appreciate it, even beyond, of course, doing the free t-shirt giveaway. And anybody else that's been hanging out and supporting the show, you guys are supporting the other shows that I do, you guys can go and catch Bizarre Inquiries on June 6th. That's going to be happening at 7:15 p.m. on the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. And if anybody has any questions, articles, clips, or anything like that they would like to submit for that, you guys can get those to me hopefully before that date. But if you guys don't, we can definitely use them on a future show, of course. And also the Open Minds Media Patreon is still under construction. A lot of cool new stuff coming that way, but I'm still trying to kind of figure stuff out to try to figure out what I want to do for the new direction for the show, because I feel like the show's been sitting a little bit stagnant for a while, and I want to kind of move into some new stuff. So hopefully you guys are hanging along for the ride, and I definitely appreciate all you guys that have been supporting the show throughout all of this. But before we get into the show, if anyone is interested in being a guest on the show, sharing their experiences or encounters, or contacting me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can call or text the Open Minds Media hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys didn't catch that, it is available down in that show description. And if you guys want to catch the show live, don't forget to go and subscribe to the Open Minds Media YouTube channel. Hit that little bell notification up in the corner, and then you guys will know whenever we happen to go live. Or if you guys are following on social media, you guys can catch the weekly schedule posted on Mondays, and it is always possible that shows may vary from that schedule throughout the week. But every single thing that I mention is all available in the link tree, which is available down in that show description. And with that, let's get into the show. Please welcome to the show, for the first time in a very long time, please welcome Astral Meadow from the Astral Hour podcast. How is it going today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back on.
Absolute pleasure to have you back on after it's been at least 2.5 years, I think, because you were in under the first 100 episodes. So it's been a long time. I think you were probably even under the first 50, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah, because we did a podcast swap and we were both kind of on the newer end of it. So it has been a while. I feel like I've evolved multiple times since then. So
Yeah, you and me both. But I guess that's all the more reason to catch up, have a good conversation, because we've been trying to do this on the back end for at least like 6 months now, trying to pop onto each other's shows. And it's just been busy schedules, life of a podcaster and stuff. But glad we're finally able to sit back down and finally catch back up after 3 years.
yes, for sure. For sure. I love your work and appreciate being welcome back on here. So.
Well, speaking of work, actually, I know that you have expanded a lot since last time we've talked, and I know that I've gotten a lot of new listeners since last time we've talked. So for anybody that may not be familiar with who you are or all of the different things that you do, I know it might be kind of hard to put it all into a brief description, but wherever you kind of want to start to kind of introduce yourself and let the listeners know a little bit about you.
All right. So I am a very multifaceted person, and I'm always expanding my practices and studies. I am a practicing astrologer, Akashic Records consultant. I read tarot. I am also a mixed media artist, a poet, which is something that I learned through my records that I had the ability to do. I am also a musician, which is something I just started doing 6 months ago, and I'm loving it.
Well, that's awesome.
I'm a mother. I homeschool. I'm a student homeopath and flower essence practitioner. So I dabble in a lot of different things. And even on my podcast, we talk about like different esoteric topics, holistic healing and wellness, some of the occult, hidden kind of things within our culture and society. So, I can probably go down any rabbit hole you wanted to today. So I'll let you just guide us in this conversation. So.
Well, I guess there's a lot of different avenues that I could go down, but I guess the best spot to start to kind of give people a little bit better of a view of where you're coming from with everything. As far as, you said you read tarot and you do all this other stuff. Where did it all kind of start for you? Where did this like spiritual journey start where you've kind of accumulated all these different things that you've done along the way?
So I would say it started with trauma and challenges and hardships as a child. I was able to kind of tap into my spiritual gifts at a young age and make connection to my spirit guides very young. And I was also really into studying different types of spirituality as a child. Like I wanted to know all of the things, and I started reading a lot of different like spiritual books, metaphysical books, listening to Coast pretty young. And I just always wanted to know more and to especially study topics that felt kind of more hidden, like, that weren't being discussed, to try to make sense and explain some of the experiences that I had when I was younger, that I continue to have. So the more I looked into some of my past lives with, past life regression and working with my Akashic Records for years now, I realized that I have been an occultist and, a shaman and a guru and a mystic and all of these things in my past lives. So it would make sense that even as a young person, I had this affinity for it, like I could already speak the language, and I just was looking for people that were embodying this information that I was so lit up by. So it's just always been kind of a part of my life and my journey. And I feel like it kind of never ends, and I'm always learning more and open to new experiences. So.
Well, I guess this is the first avenue where we can start turning down, getting into a main kind of focus topic on stuff. I'd love to kind of dive into some of this occult knowledge that you've picked up along the way, but I feel like the first step to kind of get into that is to first kind of get into the Akashic Records, because it's been a while since I've talked about that on the show. So maybe you can kind of lay a little bit of a groundwork for it for the listeners and kind of let them know like your idea and perception of like what you believe the Akashic Records is.
Okay. So to define them, which, it's funny, if you have your records open, you ask them what they are, the definition will slightly alter every time because they are a living body of wisdom that is constantly being updated and expanded on. They are a vibrational archive that holds the stories of every living being who has ever lived. And they hold the history and the origins and the stories of Earth and the cosmos itself. So you can quite literally ask the Akashic Records anything. There are, certain questions that tend to work better when you're working with the records, which would be open-ended because they don't like to make a grand prediction about the future because of free will. But yeah, it's kind of, some people might refer to it as the Book of Life. It is brought up in so many different cultures and given different names. But yeah, it's basically like a collective library that holds the wisdom of everything that has been, that is, and has the potential to be. And it's, it's full of this unconditional love. So it's not like when you go to the library, like the librarian doesn't really like know you or care about you. They're just like, okay, we go to that shelf to find this book. The records, have this connection to all of the beings that love you, that have supported you throughout all of your incarnations, which they would call the masters. All of your loved ones who have crossed over, make connection there because every being that has ever existed has connection to the records. So, it's not just, useless information. Like, it's not just information mining. It's always like this living, beautiful wisdom. And it's something that you can carry with you, throughout life. There's things that came to me like 4 or 5 years ago in the records. And I'm like, oh my God, this is it. Like this, in that moment, it made so much sense. But then 5 years later, I'm living this experience out and I'm like, this is wild. Like the records nailed this. And because I was somewhat prepared, I'm able to really notice when I'm at like a pivotal point in my journey. So they are just great guides. Well, I say they because it's living. It's made up of many different types of beings. And they just hold space for us as we move through life. My favorite thing to do with them is just to go to them when I feel kind of lost or confused, when I need certainty. And they always see us as complete. They always see us as whole in every moment. And so when we feel fragmented or alone, they remind us of all of the things that we've overcome, of our beauty, of our strengths. And it's just, there's like boundless love within the Akashic field. So it's a beautiful body of wisdom.
Hold on tight, guys. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. But in the meantime, don't forget to follow Inquiries of Our Reality on Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget to check out Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok. I'd love to hear from you guys, so feel free to leave a comment or spark up a conversation. I love getting to know you guys. And now back to the show.
So I guess this is kind of a weird question, but it'll kind of lead into a point and hopefully some interesting conversation on this one. But as far as like the Akashic Records go, I know a lot of people have theories on like where these things are inhabiting or stored, however you want to kind of word it. But what's kind of your belief on like where these things could potentially be like within our reality?
So I teach an Akashic Records class and I have a whole slide and it's like a firework and it's like, where are the records? And it's like, they're everywhere. And it like explodes because, the word Akasha is connected to, it's a Sanskrit word that means primary substance. And some people associate it with ether. So it's quite literally like the building block of everything. And I kind of see it as sort of like a web where everything is entangled. So there's literally nowhere that the records are not. However, there's different access points. So sometimes people, when they finally, take a moment to go into the records and do the process, they're like, this feels very familiar, because there's moments where we're just kind of, I feel like, slipping in and out. We're having a mystical experience or we're in a trance-like state, and we may be accessing the records, just not intentionally. Some people will say that there's an aspect, where you can access them through the astral plane or the fourth dimension. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that because the fourth dimension also has a lot of distortion. So it's not that you wouldn't receive insights from there, but if you really want to be rooted, you want to work with the sacred prayer, put yourself in a really centered space. Another person that I really love and respect, Barbara Handclough. She is a Cherokee record keeper. So she holds information from the, ancient cultures that have passed it down. She teaches in her book, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, that the records, although they are everywhere, that there is a storehouse in the iron crystal core in the center of the earth. And I really love this because she goes on to describe that we all have iron within our blood, and it resonates, right, with that iron crystal core. And when I went to teach the records at the summit the other day, they were like, please bring up Barbara Handclough's work. And I was like, really? Okay. Because what this does is it gives us as humans permission to access the Akashic records, and kind of validates that everyone is allowed and everybody belongs, and there is no specific initiation, or we don't have to be a certain way or be from a certain culture. If you are a human being, then you have permission to do this. So it's like the humans are sort of the keepers of the Earth's records. And I also like thinking of it being at the core of the earth because it's so grounding for me. If I'm like meditating and imagining roots just going all the way in, it keeps me very much like present in here on earth. So even if I'm asking something that's very far out and we are traveling long distances to find the answers, I still feel very grounded and comfortable with where I am in my physical body because, we are made of the earth. So yeah, that there are different perspectives on it. The ultimate answer would be that the records are everywhere, but they have different access points.
See, I've always kind of entertained the idea that it might be possible that they're somewhat stored in like water itself. And I guess with that idea, it kind of goes into water like the sea, and it also goes into like water within the atmosphere, which kind of gets into the whole like ether concept that there's always some form of moisture within the air. But the interesting thing about water, which is I've always kind of entertained that theory, is one, of course, like our body is primarily made of water, and any living thing that's like the primary source, no matter what, is that everything has always been formed to some point with water. And when something dies, the water evaporates back into, the earth, and then it ends up being this constant cycle of every living thing has had this water pass through it constantly through everything's life cycle. And even on another flip side, it seems like you always have your best ideas when you're in the shower or when you're in water or when you're like relaxing in a pool. And it's always those times when it like hits you that it almost kind of feels like you didn't think of it. It's just like too perfect that you didn't think of it. So it kind of seems like at certain times you come into tune with them. But I don't know if there's anybody that's kind of like talked about that theory, but I've always kind of entertained the idea about the Akashic records existing within water because it seems to be like that primary source, like you said. And it's one of those things that kind of to some extent exist everywhere.
Right. Yeah, if you think about, just the aspects of water connecting to the subconscious, and it naturally has kind of a dreamy, etheric vibe to it. So it would make sense that when you're connecting with water, that you might get those downloads because you can tap into subconscious material or even collective unconscious material from accessing that element. And I think when we're in that like trance, like dreamy, relaxed state, that we're more open to receiving messages and insights they're already there. It's just when we put ourselves in more of a flow state, we're able to tune in and really, grab on to some of those truths or those ideas in that moment. So I do feel like water is a beautiful element to work with, to gain access into the unconscious kind of material.
I mean, even like the flow state, since you kind of brought up that like Zen area. I mean, once you hit that like flow state, it kind of seems like you almost get to this point where it's like you're processing while working on like autopilot at the same time, but you also are having these like other things that are coming through your mind as you're doing that particular thing. It just seems like anytime you find some opportunity where you're just in this state where you're completely like zen and connected to source, you seem to be in this opportunity where if you know what you're doing, you can hopefully like access these records. And like you said, people don't notice that they access these records, because how many great adventures have there been through time who have mentioned like, oh, it doesn't feel like my idea. I was just sitting there and it just popped into my head one day. Like all the greatest inventors do that. And even connecting into the Akashic Records concept. I mean, if there's something that needs to be known to the grand universe, then it seems like it's something that'll pop up in multiple places where, you know, there won't just be this one inventor that's working on this one thing. It'll be like 10 other people and they're all doing it in their own particular way, but they're all racing inevitably to the same end on this thing, because it seems like they all kind of got like a download and then they all kind of took their own free will to do what they wanted with that download to make that process work, and then created this other thing. Like even within sci-fi writing or movie writing or all that, like it's all philosophy and ideas that need to be brought to the general public. And I know that there's the whole occult side of that stuff too, of course, but on the flip side of it, it's like if there's an idea that needs to be brought to the public, it would make sense why all of a sudden you'll see like a fluctuation of this type of movie, then this type of movie, then this type of movie. It's because everybody got this somewhat download and then they all kind of went in their own avenue and created that thing in their own way.
Right. I do think you could associate, you know, aspects of the collective unconscious absolutely with the records. Which is where I think people are getting those downloads all simultaneously. I think certain archetypes are more present at certain times for us. There are, you know, definitely innovative ideas that I feel like are accessible at certain times for us. So, you know, I definitely think people are able to tap into that, and some people a little more so. They're a little bit more sensitive, or they're more focused on, and so they're more like in resonance with that information. And so they're the ones that are kind of catching it because it's already something that they're seeking. So when it comes available, they're like, oh, this is how it is. And that's why, you know, electricity, there was like 10 different inventors that were, you know, so close right at the same time. They'd all made a similar connection. And I do think it was because collectively we were ready for electricity. And so those innovators that were seeking that next step were able to access it at that point, but not before.
And I guess this will kind of bring it into maybe another topic, but so the whole idea of past lives, of course, is this something that you said you can obtain through the Akashic Records, or is it something that you like almost obtain through like your own consciousness, but it's not necessarily like part of the collective? Like what's kind of the idea on like how you bring that in to be able to interpret it? Because like, for example, when somebody's having like a past life regression and there's somebody else that's doing it for them, like, are they getting them into that like Akashic record state in order for them to bring it up themselves? Or like, how does that kind of function and work?
I think it just depends on the person. I think sometimes they kind of go into more of that subconscious state, which feels very similar to the records. Especially when you're going into your personal records, because it holds all this content. So it is hard to tell like where the line is, because there's so many different ways to access past lives. So with the records, I don't just like go looking for past lives. If I want to go looking, I usually do like a QHHT or something, and I do vision quests. But if I'm going through an experience, so the records is a very present modality that I work with. So I ask like about today or this moment. And a lot of times I'll be dealing with something in that moment and it will be connected to something in a past life and it will come forward. And so I don't even ask them like, hey, could you tell me about a past life? It's just that past version of myself might be the guide, or it's actually sort of the cause to the effect that I'm dealing with in that moment, or there's some kind of like karmic energy going on that in that moment's ready to be cleared. But in order to do that, I have to kind of acknowledge, you know, the issue or the thing, you know, from the past. So, you know, I think that there's ways to access your past lives without going into the Akashic Records. due to the subconscious kind of holding that space. But so it's hard to tell, right? I'm not exactly sure. I'm not like very well versed in past life regressions. So as far as I've had it done, but I don't do it myself. So but the records are like, they're kind of maybe weaving in and out of that, but they're their own source of information, if that makes sense, because they are connected to everything. Where, if you're going into your past lives, you're kind of just accessing like your part in that story, and not necessarily like everybody or everything.
And I guess kind of talking a little bit more about past lives too. I've talked to a bunch of different people about this, and everybody kind of has like an indifferent interpretation. And I'm sure it's one of those things where, depending on who you are, what your specific contract is, what your journey is, of course, everybody's going to have a kind of different experience with this. But it seems like the majority of the time when people are talking about past lives and they've done past life regressions, they mention this idea that whatever their like biggest mistake was in their last past life is basically what they're working at in this past life. And it's like this continuous like flip-flop of like whatever you did bad, you're just continuously like kind of growing until you get to this point where you're like not trying to make up for something you did in your past life. But then on the other side of it, there's the other people that talk about this whole idea that the whole intention is about experience from different perspectives, meaning that it's not necessarily that you're making amends for the last thing, but you're supposed to live the opposite side of that, meaning that like, say you were like a brutal killer in one life. That would mean like in the next life that you would end up being somebody that ends up getting brutally killed by somebody like that. And it's not that it's karma back and forth. It's just that that consciousness is trying to see like both perspectives of life, basically. So it's like this whole idea of not necessarily growth, but just being able to see every perspective of things. But at least from what you've kind of dived into, your understanding of it, what's kind of your idea? Is it supposed to be continuous growth or just like multiple perspectives and experiences?
I think it's both. I think we are always learning, growing, and expanding. And I do think that we go back with the victim perpetrator thing often. So that we can see it, like you said, from all the different perspectives. But I do think we are also growing while we're having those experiences. And, I do think sometimes we tend to outgrow a cycle. So I think it does have like a cyclic pattern to it, the different points that we choose to incarnate in. And I don't know. I feel like sometimes certain themes come forward. And for some people, they might just dabble in like one or two of those themes. And for some people that are doing a lot of like healing work, they are really pushing themselves and taking certain initiations and expanding and growing so much that they might be working with a lot of different cycles that they have sort of started in past lives, that they're working and like upgrading in this current life. So I think it just depends on the individual and what the soul was seeking in this incarnation.
I mean, kind of
they want to play.
Kind of a weird thing to think about too, but it's one of those things too that every role essentially needs to get filled. So it's like, there needs to be an antagonist for there to be some reason for growth to happen. Like anybody that dives into any of this stuff, almost every guest I've had on the show, it's like the strongest willed people have had trauma in the past, and that's the reason why they became strong willed. So you get into this whole idea about like, why does evil even exist in the first place? And I always talk about this idea that if evil didn't exist, there wouldn't be a reason for growth to happen. So there wouldn't be a reason to get better, and then there wouldn't be a reason to be strong. So if you're kind of viewing it from that aspect, it's like, it may not be that a person is inherently evil because they reincarnate 10 times as a serial killer. It just might be that they're intended to be like the antagonist to the story in order to push the rest of the story forward. Because if you don't have any conflict, I mean, imagine a story without any conflict. It's just going to sit in one stagnant point where they never leave the village in the beginning. And that's how life would be if you wouldn't have these characters. And maybe that is literally some people's role to play, is just to be the person that, sets the fire that makes it so that somebody has to be the person that saves them to make that person the hero. Like somebody has to play that role. Like every role needs to be filled. Otherwise the ecosystem doesn't work.
Right. Yep. And the records would agree with that. And I think that's why they're able to boundlessly love everybody and have compassion in every moment, because they can see the roles that everybody are playing, and that, what we might call an evil act is actually a catalyst for something even greater to occur. So I think you're definitely spot on in that observation.
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back with that deep conversation you crave. But just a quick reminder, if you'd like to snag some gear for this show, Bizarre Encounters, or one of your favorite cryptids or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media merch store for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly. And t-shirts now for the low price of just $15.68 plus shipping. And now let's get back into it.
And kind of talking about some of your past life stuff too. I always like to talk about people's past lives and where it kind of correlates with like their life now, especially if they kind of dive into that aspect of it. And I know that you brought up that some of the stuff that you dive into now was stuff that you dived into in past lives. So if you're willing to share some of your past life stories, I'd love to kind of hear how some of this stuff connects into what you do now.
All right. Well, I usually don't like actually go into it, but I guess I could share a couple that people could look into and discover, because I have some that are researchable. But the first one that came forward that was just super profound for me actually came through me having a session with my teacher that taught me the Akashic Records. And if I had been the one that brought it forward, I would have thought I was making it up, because I have this favorite movie, The Fountain, and I watch it once a year. And it's just so beautiful. It's full of like esoteric wisdom. But it's specifically the story of like Spain and the conquistadors coming into this Mayan culture looking for the tree of life. Okay. And even when I was a kid, I remember saying the word conquistador, and I just like, not what they did. I didn't like what they did. Okay. I actually think I had some trauma around it, but I liked saying conquistador. It made no sense. Right. And I loved this movie. So this woman does not know me. Okay. And I asked her, I said, is there a lifetime I could Google? That was my question, because I was just very curious. And she starts doing this thing, like she's like curling her mustache. And she's like, the King of Spain, Philip III, the King of Spain. And it was crazy to me, because Queen Isabella, that's in this movie that I love, was like his granddaughter. And he didn't send the conquistadors. That was from his bloodline, right? But Spain played this huge role in this like collective trauma, right? Of like exterminating the civilization. It's horrible.
They all laid down, unfortunately, because they had the whole story about, this white skinned person returning with this body armor, and that they were the gods that gave them knowledge. So they all just were like, hey, this is the guy. I mean,
right. And it's one of those where you want to be like someone cool, and you're like, oh shit, like, oops, like, but I needed to learn about that. First off, why was I drawn to the story in the first place? And it's because I needed to go back there, and I needed to forgive that part of myself that unknowingly, kind of gave birth to this god awful aspect in history. I mean, it's like the whole Inquisition and everything was happening around this time. And I remember being a kid, like hearing about that and just being so upset. And when I realized this, the records were like, hey, when you explore this, really feel into your body. Like, how does it feel when you learn this, And they gave me a forgiveness prayer to say to help me kind of clear any karmic, debris out of that and really show myself unconditional love. And it really did help me a lot. And, kind of release some guilt, because like I know more now. I'm not that person anymore now. So he was also very pious and spiritual in that lifetime, but more from the Catholic perspective. So I have another lifetime as a Renaissance priest that was a really big astrologer that created like talismans and was connected to like restoring like the Hermetic information. He like translated the Corpus Hermeticum and all of this stuff. And I probably wouldn't have believed that one either, except that I discovered it over a long period of time of like asking random questions. And then one day I stopped and asked my records, like, am I this person? After like receiving all of these things, and they were like, yes. And it was just so wild to me how I stumbled upon that. But I really loved this version of me, because he was a Catholic priest, but he was like obsessed with like mysticism and, like the Serapis cult, and how all of the Egyptian, that mythos played into the Christianity was an extension of like the Serapis cult. And
people forget how much mysticism there was in like early Christianity. Like you dive into like King Solomon, all that stuff. It's all mysticism.
Right. It was kind of allowed. I mean, I was like this close to being burned as a heretic, but I was like dodging that. But it's funny because I had the same curiosity in that lifetime that I kind of do now, where I'm like, well, I mean, it's kind of a heresy, but we need to make the connection. But yeah, I've also been told I was a Sami shaman, which was very interesting because I'd never heard of the Sami people before. But some of the like the sigils and the glyphs and everything that they work with are things that I was just kind of intuitively drawing in the dirt as a child.
What area of the world is that, if you don't mind me asking?
It's kind of in like Scandinavia. I've also been in like the Germanic kind of tribes. I had a lifetime. It's so vulnerable because I actually don't usually share a lot of this because I feel like people will think that my ego is just like inflated or something. But I had a lifetime that I discovered the other day through a meditation in this Germanic culture where it was like pre-Viking, but as the Viking civilization was occurring. So when I was a child, like we weren't fighting or anything like that. It was like a peaceful lifetime, but eventually the fight came out. So I was actually one of like the early Viking women at that time and had to like take up a shield. And so I've been all over the place. I've been told by my records that out of 998 lifetimes, 60 of them were on Earth, and I've been able to find like maybe 20 of those. But that gives me a lot of off-Earth lifetimes, so which I won't necessarily go into because I'm sure it sounds like too bizarre. But
well, if it makes you feel any better, I'll kind of get into some of my stuff. I haven't obviously been able to do as much as you as far as diving into this stuff, but the first time I did a past life regression, talking about stuff that you're linked to as a kid and you're still linked to as an adult, you never really understand why. I've always been linked to all this Viking stuff, like fascinated with Viking shows and Viking folklore and ravens and all this type of stuff. And then I ended up doing a past life regression and realized that I basically spent this life as like a Viking shaman, which is why I had all these like weird visions when I was kind of going through my psychedelic days, and I would be like standing there like imagining myself, like I could see my hands and stuff inside of a tent, like doing things like as like a Viking, but it was just this weird like vision quest type thing that would happen. But that was supposedly my one before my current life, and the whole aspect of that was basically that my daughter had died, and I spent my entire life searching into the occult, basically trying to find a way to bring her back, and in turn completely neglected my son and my wife, which is supposed to be like in this life, I'm assuming that I'm supposed to be more of like the family guy that's here for everybody because of that past one. But even connecting to some more, I always had this like fascination with like the Egyptian occult and all this Egyptian stuff. And I was talking to somebody else, and they were saying that at one point I was like one of the warrior class during like the Egyptian days when they were building the pyramids and everything. So it completely would make sense that I was fascinated with all this, like the pyramids and the gods and how they would like, take care of the bodies and everything when I was like 5, 6, which makes no sense on why somebody would be hyper fixated on Egypt history for whatever reason at that age. And then the last one that I was hearing was that I was in some type of like Asian country, and specifically that I was some type of like warrior, which is why I've always had this like drawn, I'm assuming that it would have been Japan, because I've always had this draw to like samurai culture and like samurai wisdom and the whole idea of like honor and like all of that. So yeah, just connecting with past lives and how it connects in with like stuff that you experience in your current life. Like I can completely see that. And I mean, just to throw this other one in, actually, there was another one where I was one of the tribes that would basically follow around mammoths and take out mammoths, and like my entire life would be basically living by mammoths. And I never understood for years why I've had this obsession with mammoths, and I like collect everything that I see with a mammoth on it. I'm just like, why am I so drawn to mammoths? And that was the explanation to why. And even to what you were saying about the whole future life concept and like off-world life concept, supposedly I've had one of those too. And I couldn't get too much of a description from this one because this was when I was doing meditating and talking to like my spirit guides and stuff. But basically the information that they gave me from that one is they were saying that the reason why when I talk about a lot of like theories on how like UFOs work and like how this advanced technology works and all of this type of stuff, they're like, there's a reason why you're weirdly close and you think differently from other people when it comes to this stuff. They're like, because you've been there. And I'm like, all right. Like that kind of makes sense why I've always had this drawn interest into sci-fi, and not just the normal sci-fi, but like I guess the Star Trek kind of side of things where it's not just like boom, boom, pew, pew, but like, here's the psychology of this. How does this thing work? How does this ship work? How would this kind of function work? How does black matter work? Like all the more mechanical aspects to like how this type of stuff work, which weirdly enough plays into my show now. So it's weird. It's like time isn't necessarily linear. So it's like, it just kind of goes in like, I don't even want to say a chronological order, but there's like a number order to the lives, even if they're not necessarily like in timeline chronological order. And it's like you just get these little remnants of the last one, which is something that pushes you further into the next one. And I've seen this in my own life. So, you know, you're talking about all this stuff, so don't feel like you're crazy either, because I'm going to sit here and make the same claims as you. So
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. And I feel like it's kind of beautiful to know that, you know, because we feel like we've forgotten everything, and you know, we've drank from the fountain of forgetfulness, and that always kind of made me sad to think about, you know, that I can't remember. But it's like there are aspects of us that can remember, that are remembering. And I think when we're in that childlike kind of state, like when we're children, we can remember because it's like we just like these things that make no sense. And then as we get older, sometimes we choose to continue, you know, to explore that more, to follow that a little further. And but it is coming from somewhere, and I do feel like we don't necessarily forget everything. We just sometimes it takes us a while to figure out why and where it all connects. But once we do, it's kind of beautiful how we've carried it forward. These things that matter to us, you know.
See, I think it's one of those things, though, you're not supposed to remember everything because then it will affect the current life. Like, you're only supposed to remember certain aspects, because if you remember every aspect of your past life, you remember the emotions you felt for your family, like all of this stuff, you're not going to be able to live this life how you're intended to live it because you're going to have too much stuff in the past. It's almost like the Matrix concept that, you know, if you're not aware that you're in the system, then you live your life like you're in the system. But if you become aware that you're in the system, then you basically just go rogue at that point, and you don't think that any of it matters anymore because you can remember everything from the past. So this is always something when it comes to knowledge, is that I don't think that there's any specific knowledge that people aren't supposed to have, but it's rather a time when you're supposed to have it. Meaning that
when you're ready,
when you're collecting all of these lives, like that time in between, I'm sure that you have every single memory of every single life on those time in between, because that's when you're supposed to have it. But when you go back in, it'll affect everything as a whole if you know all of this type of stuff. But even like knowledge as a whole, like we were talking about earlier in the show, that certain things are supposed to come at certain times. So, you know, you get into the whole like even biblical concept of things where they talk about like knowledge and how, you know, knowledge was given by this other antagonist type being. I don't think that it's necessarily that we weren't supposed to obtain any of that knowledge. It's just a matter of we're only supposed to receive things at certain times. So that being said, it's like you don't go back to a caveman and give them a car or, you know, like a fighter jet, because it's not that time when they need to understand that. It's not that that knowledge is bad. It's just that they're way over their head with what they're dealing with. So I think it's kind of the same thing with people and with all of this stuff, is that no knowledge is inherently bad. It's just time and place when you're supposed to have it. And as a broader society, we all kind of adapt to be able to acquire this baseline of knowledge together, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, if you think about even like children, like you don't give a 4-year-old a car right out the bat because they don't know how to start it. And if they did, they would probably run it into a tree. And so I feel like it is part of like us maturing as beings. And now we're ready, right, for some like different ways of thinking, more individualized types of knowledge and things like that, instead of being just like in a hive mind. So I do think that we've evolved as a species, like in like perfect order, and we do receive certain upgrades at certain times and learn certain things when we're ready. That could be detrimental if we learn them too soon, because we wouldn't know what to do with them. We might, blow the planet up or something.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in a flash. But if you don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You can get ad-free and early access to this show and Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. That's less than the price of a bag of chips, and it's a great way to support the show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts or premium video versions of the show, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits and 7-day free trials available. Now let's get back into it.
I mean, even kind of diving into like astrology, as you kind of brought up earlier. I mean, obviously there's two sides to astrology and knowledge as a whole that, there's even the knowledge itself isn't necessarily inherently bad. Like I was saying, it's what people do with it. And that's also the aspect of it, is that maybe we are at a point where we can understand this knowledge, but it doesn't mean that we're at a mature enough point as a society to have this type of knowledge, meaning that like nuclear bombs, for example, like nuclear anything. It's like, I think that that's something that came a bit too early because we're messing with something that we don't fully understand as we're messing with it. But in time, when we get to a point where we fully understand how to deal with this stuff and we don't have the idea that we want to blow each other up, but rather that maybe we want to use it to create this renewable energy source that is continuously creates energy and nobody has that negative inclining with it, then it's not, again, bad knowledge or anything. It's just a matter of having it at the right time. And even with the astrology stuff too, like I was mentioning, like, there's circles that are against astrology and then there's circles that are for astrology. But if you look at it from the right paradigm, usually it's like a lot of like Christians are against astrology, just hearing that as like a whole. But you start diving into like the ancient mysticism of Christianity, and then you start realizing that it's, you had like the three wise men following the stars, for example. It's not a matter of like, again, that knowing astrology is bad. It's just that maybe from certain perspectives, like you're not supposed to use it to be able to tell your future because maybe it'll ruin your life, like your plan of what you're supposed to do with your life if you already know what the future event is. But if you're rather using it to be able to tell, like, when's the right time to plant, when's the right time to do this, when's the right time to do that, then that's using it for the right knowledge. Because again, it's like, if you know the day you're going to die, you're going to live your life completely differently. Like I'm kind of one of those people that, as fascinating as it is to know the future, I definitely think that if there is a controlling force out there, it's not something that they want us to know because it ruins the way that whatever this is supposed to play out.
Yeah. Astrology is interesting because, the mystical branches of all the religions are usually pretty open to astrology. And, there was plenty of Christian mystics that were astrologers that were practicing regularly. Like I said, in my past life, where I was literally working with the famous artists of the Renaissance to create talisman, with embodying the planetary energies that were available in a certain moment. And so all of that was, church approved. So it's like there is a filter on it. And it is quite sad because, I have people, like I had a woman that signed up for my class and she's like, oh, well, I actually can't come because my husband's doesn't let me study astrology. And I was like, what? And it just shocked me because like it just felt so dated, but there is just like a block, and I think it's because people don't understand it. But I'm always like, the Magi were magicians. Like, Jesus had 12 disciples. Like, there's 12 zodiac signs. It's like to me, when you study astrology, it actually gives it more meaning. And you start to see even the Bible from a more esoteric lens. And to me, it's more beautiful, like to have a deeper understanding of, the symbols and the archetypes and the energies that we're playing out. And, but I can see, I guess, why some people are afraid of it. I don't know, but it's never been a fear for me. So.
See, I think it's one of those things that was in the early stuff, and it was this idea that like anybody can be able to make this communication, can be able to do this type of stuff. So it's not even necessarily that the word of the Bible said it, but rather that the people that started taking charge of the word of the Bible started manipulating the story into like if you want to talk to God, you have to come through me first, kind of a thing. Because
Right.
it seems like with the New Age Christian movement, there's this whole idea that a lot of them don't even, like, they kind of do this idea where they kind of like sit down and they read Bibles together. They're not into this like modern church concept because they've kind of built into this idea that specifically like a lot of these mega churches and these like really big churches are kind of gearing the word their own particular way. So of course, like with any structure that ever gets created, at some point there is going to be somebody that tries to manipulate it and try to make it fit their perspective. So I don't think that's necessarily like as a whole, like the entire, Catholic or Christian community said like, haha, we're going to hide this information from anybody, but rather that
Right.
it was a transition that happened through time where you started having this idea about like, if you want to talk to God, you have to talk through me first. So then all the mysticism started getting kind of pulled out of it or pulled out of the general story or kind of hidden within the story. So that idea can be portrayed a little bit more. But again, the people that really dive into it and really start digging into this stuff, they realize that again, there's so much mysticism that's built into it. And even like I said, the modern day Christians have this whole idea that like you can get rid of whatever these dark beings are, regardless of your perspective. There are these dark beings by like you yourself. Like you don't need like this special person to do it. And I mean, that's something we see even within other circles. Because for me, a lot of the time, I feel like a lot of these religions aren't necessarily like one is correct, but rather that they're all different perspectives of the same story happening. So if you're kind of viewing it from that lens, then I don't know, all the pieces kind of fit together a little bit better as far as understanding this whole like mysticism and being able to like banish evil spirits yourself and like the people having more power, but still under whatever this creator being is. And I mean, playing into the more astral idea, I always say that, the universal consciousness is realistically the same thing. I mean, it seems like there's still some type of, I guess, bigger mind, bigger being, bigger whatever that has some type of like control or ability that they were able to create this. And I mean, not to get off on a whole other side tangent or rant, but that could be a concept that we have yet to understand, because who knows, we might one day go and drop some random little thing on a planet and all of a sudden life gets created from there and we become the gods of that. And we realize that that was the perspective the whole time. Like, who knows, but not to go off on a rant, but
Right. Yeah. We could go into like all these rabbit holes together.
So kind of diving, I guess, into some of the occult stuff that you've picked up along the way. I know that everybody kind of has different messages that they've acquired throughout their life that they feel are some very prolific things that would do a lot of good for other people to hear and kind of have in their general idea of life. So what are some of like your favorite, more prolific things that you've picked up along your journey that you feel might be some things that people need to hear for their life?
I suppose the most universal truths that I've stumbled upon would be the Hermetic principles. So, I like to look at these when I'm teaching astrology, but it's really, since they're universal, you can apply them to anything. So let me think if I can pull them all out without reading anything. But number one would be all is mind. And so I kind of look at this as it's all interconnected, and or it's all happening in our minds. The law of correspondence, which would be like as above, so below. So this is, a really big thing with astrology, because how is astrology so prevalent? Well, it's because everything that's happening up here is corresponding with what's happening down here. And everything that we're doing is actually also connected and corresponding with the above.
That rule I've seen universally with like everything. That's like something I bring up,
everywhere.
I swear, like every other episode on the show, that like for every like good reaction, there's an equal negative reaction. For every positive thing, there's the complete opposite negative
the
thing.
law of polarity. So that's one too, the law of polarity, where, it's all the same overall. It's just different aspects of it. So correspondence and polarity sound very similar, but they're just like slightly different. The law of vibration. So at the end of the day, like we are vibrational beings, like the planets are vibrational beings. Everything in existence has a vibration, right? And we are, walking in and through and connecting with everything else. And that also can alter our vibrations. And while we might correspond to the vibration of a planet, we might be embodying like Venus's vibration during a certain transit. The law of rhythm, I think I'm on 5. I'm like, I wasn't prepared for this question at all.
Well, I mean, those two in particular, we're talking about this whole idea of knowledge where it's supposed to come to people at a certain time. And maybe it's one of those things that goes in cycles where, like, if people don't pick it up, then it ends up coming back around at another point.
Right.
But it feels like we're inevitably at that point again with this whole idea of like frequency and vibration, because that's something that's talked about universally between all phenomenon. Like, you got UFO people talking about it, you got Sasquatch people, you got ghost people, you got spiritual people. You even have like people that are in conspiracies talking about this whole idea of like vibration and frequency, and sci-fi people diving into like astrophysics talking about this. Like, that is one of those key ones that I think is just hitting on all cylinders right now, and the universe is just really trying to get everybody to figure it out. And I'm really hoping that we're at like the cusp of hopefully getting to a point with that, and it doesn't end up going back around in a cycle where maybe another 100 years somebody will figure it out. But yeah, that's one that we're definitely onto something with it, because everybody in every asshead is talking about it.
Right. And I think science now is able to kind of show us examples of how it's all vibrating, where before it was just this universal truth that the sages would spout out. But like, we just had to kind of trust them. But now we have, the images of, the auric field and everything like that can kind of prove it. And the law of vibration is really important in my work when I am working with homeopathy in the flower essences specifically, because they are vibrational remedies that, have a certain resonance that we are introducing into the field or the etheric body of a person, and then their vital force is responding to it. Or their emotional body when we're working with flower essences. So vibration's like a huge one for me that keeps unfolding in these beautiful ways too, where I'm like, oh my God, like
that's like a little bit more intense, but the whole like mushroom concept, where obviously not nearly as or way more intense than the flower concept. But for anybody that's, dabbled with psychedelics at all, it's like particularly mushrooms, you understand the whole idea of like that frequency and vibration, because as these plants are starting to kind of take hold of you, you feel your whole body starting to vibrate until you get to this point where you feel like everything is vibrating in sync. And that's usually that's the point, where you start actually experiencing these psychedelic drugs. But assumably, like, every plant has their own vibration and frequency. It's just a matter that some of them are significantly higher to the point where they basically bump us up into the next state of consciousness, where the other ones, it's a little bit lower, so they're not, skyrocketing you up to seeing like the next reality.
Right, which has a lot to do with the dilution aspect. So with homeopathy and with flower essences, we are diluting the substances all the way down to where there's nothing material left. So if you're taking psychedelics, you're usually taking a higher potency of a substance. So you're getting this like total otherworldly experience. But when we dilute it, we get the healing component without the physical symptoms that comes with it. So it's like a totally different way of working with, plants and minerals and things like that, because we're working with their essences instead of, even like essential oils, like they're so potent, you have to use so much plant material to make a drop of essential oil, but we're like less. And as you go up in dilution, you actually get a more powerful substance, as far as the healing is concerned. So you can go really deep into, the root cause of a certain ailment, and sometimes even find a cure for it through the dilution, which is so bizarre because you would think, more potency would be more powerful. But on the energetic level, it's actually the more diluted, the more potent it is in the healing aspect.
Hold that thought. Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break. And now let's dive back in.
What's funny is that my girlfriend about 4 or 5 years ago, she got really into essential oils, making like headache rubs, making all this different stuff. And we've eventually gotten to a point now where it's like, we basically consult using that stuff first before anything. And it's weird. Like, there's little home remedies for everything. Like, I had a sigh once, and I took like a little drop of lavender oil, and I put it right underneath my eye. And it was like the next day that little sigh went away. It's like, people don't want to put validity into this type of stuff, but you have to try it for yourself. Like, of course, like, if you're dealing with like a major ailment, major illness, it's like you're not going to take it once and it's not just going to disappear the next day. But when you have these little subtle things like cuts and everything like that, or like little size on your eye, it's like you'd be surprised how fast this stuff actually works. And I mean, even just at the simplest fact of it, like you take like what the base ingredient is of something and you can basically take that as an essential oil and use that instead. Like Vicks, prime example. You want to, instead of smearing all that gross stuff all over your chest and having all the other additional chemicals and everything it has in it, you just use some eucalyptus essential oil, rub it on your chest, and it clears you up way better than the Vicks ends up doing in the first place. And you don't have that additional, all the extra stuff with it. Like, you know, people actually have to like try some of this stuff out and realize that it, you know, there's a reason why, you know, people will stand by this stuff. And at the base of it, I mean, most of what big pharma is just trying to isolate one particular thing and then they turn it into something that's addictive. So they're essentially taking this stuff, isolating it with other things, making it more addictive or where you have to continue using it. And they're essentially using the same stuff. It's just in a different context.
Right. They want to control it and make sure that it's patented and that it can't be recreated and it doesn't cure. And so it's like a different form of medicine altogether. But, you know, homeopathy has been practiced for over 200 years, and it's actually a complete form of medicine practiced by millions of people all over the world. And in India, 50% of the population use homeopathy, and they have hospitals fully dedicated to homeopathy. You know, we're still using, you know, surgery when it needed. And sometimes people need stitches and they need x-rays. And we, you know, sometimes we really have to work with the technology. And there is a time and place for Western medicine. But it's, you know, homeopathy goes very deep and has treated all sorts of chronic conditions. I've watched it reverse tetanus. I've watched it, you know, reverse autoimmune disease, things that Western medicine can't touch. I've actually seen, you know, read cases and seen stories about this. And I work with a lot of teachers, you know, from all over the world. They come together and teach classes at my school. And it's just been profound because it's not just like I right now I'm practicing an acute form of it where I'm like helping people on, like you're saying, like styes, bumps and bruises, flus and stuff like that. But it can actually also be used in chronic situations if you're working with a professional, and we are trained in pathology and anatomy. And a lot of doctors actually, you know, are homeopaths now because what they were noticing is that the medicine that they were practicing was doing more harm than it was helping. And so ethically they jumped ship. So there's so many doctors that are actually practicing homeopaths because homeopathy is gentle and it can actually lead a person to an overall cure for something that Western medicine is just suppressing, because Western medicine is based on the allopathic model, which is treating with opposites. And when you treat with opposites, you always suppress what's actually going on, and that can bury it deeper to the tissues. That's how we get chronic disease. But with homeopathy, we treat with similars. So like curing like. And when you treat this way with highly diluted medicines, you don't suppress the symptoms, you actually support them, right? And you allow them to come out, and then the person is fully healed. So something like allergies that someone has every year, that might fully go away with a homeopathic remedy, because you're working with the person's vital force and working on their susceptibility. And then now they have found a cure for something that the Western model was just going to suppress every single spring, right? And eventually now that person might have asthma and they might have autoimmune, and now they might have weird allergies to 10 other foods. And it's you know, it's not really a great model for wellness overall. So homeopathy is beautiful because it's more holistic. So it's working on, you know, mind, body, and spirit simultaneously. So
the whole Western medicine concept almost kind of reminds me of like theoretically how you'd work on a car. It's just a matter of like, all right, this piece doesn't work. We're going to take that piece out and we're going to put a new piece in. And then on the other side, all right, we have this weird sputter coming from the engine. So we're going to put this stuff in and we're going to see if it works, and maybe it'll stop that for a while, but something else might start up, and then when that problem comes, then we'll throw something else in to see if that stops that problem until the next thing pops up. Like, it literally feels like Western medicine has the same ideology as like how you'd work on a car. It's not a matter of like, let's fix the car as a whole, but rather let's slap some Band-Aids on it and just replace the piece and hope that everything works.
Right. It's a mechanical view of the body. It's looking at the body as a machine instead of this beautiful, being that's actually whole in its, truest form. It just needs a little guidance and support. And, one of my favorite things about homeopathy is, not villainizing symptoms and instead like asking my body, like, well, what are you trying to show me? Is there something going on in my lifestyle that is not setting well that I need to change? Have I been exposed to something that needs to come out? So like with a cough, you wouldn't want to suppress a cough because the body is trying to get the contaminant or, whatever it's been exposed to out. And so with homeopathy, we're working with the body and supporting it as it's going through those symptoms instead of saying, oh no, let's wage war, let's blow up all the germs within the body. And then how many other side effects will come from that, So it's, I have a lot of episodes on my podcast where we talk about it. I actually started a whole new YouTube channel. It just released yesterday, I think. We'll be exploring it more because it is a very scientific model. It's proven. And, a lot of the stuff that the Western medicine is doing is actually the result of things that they learned from the homeopaths. And then, they kind of took the information and ran with it and then discredited homeopathy. But it is a very powerful form of medicine and it can go really deep into the root of any kind of ailment. So
Kind of reminds me of hopefully this is a good analogy, almost kind of imagining the body like a bell. It's a matter of like, if it's this thing that vibrates and it makes this perfect tone and frequency, you don't want to amend to the crack because it's never going to have that same resonance and vibration again. Rather than doing that, it's like you'd rather strengthen the bell as a whole so that it can continue vibrating properly rather than just, putting this other material in this crack and then making it so it never quite vibrates or resonates exactly the same again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess the biggest difference too is, with homeopathy, we're not like looking at one symptom at a time. We're not just saying, oh, there's this ailment. We're asking the person's whole journey up until that point. So we're like, how does that ailment make you feel? And, what's your mental health like? What's your sleep like?
It's like the terrain theory concept. If you remember people talking about that a while.
What's going on in your life right now? Because there's all of these things that lead up to that distortion, right? That creates that symptom. And so, their dream life matters. So when we're repertorizing, which is the book, The Repertory is what we shift through people's symptoms to find specific remedies that match those symptoms, so many things matter. So is your pain throbbing? Is it, pulsating? Is it stitching? Is it stinging? Because that's a different type of pain. So when you go to Western medicine, you say, I'm hurting, they give you anti-inflammatory. It's not individualized at all. They give everybody that.
It just masks all pain as a whole.
Right. They're not asking you, are you sleeping well? Do you have any other symptoms? So we always take the entire case of the whole person at once, because we recognize that you can't just treat one part of a person. You have to treat them as an entire being all at once, or you're really just putting a Band-Aid on something, right? So it's just a totally different way of viewing the body and health overall. So.
I guess another good way to kind of describe it is like doing an analogy with like an aquarium or like a terrarium, for example. Mm-hmm. Rather than taking out like a piece of mold or a piece of algae that you have in your tank and saying, all right, the rest of the tank's going to be fine now. It's rather this idea that you say, all right, what's causing that in the first place? Because rather than us just cutting it out, we want to figure out why it's being caused in the first place to make it so that the entire ecosystem can balance itself properly. That's a good way of describing it, is like the whole body being this balanced ecosystem rather than something that you can just pull a part out of and hope that the rest of it works properly. You got to fine tune everything all together, because if this problem keeps reoccurring, it's clearly not a problem with this exact location, but a problem with the system as a whole, that it keeps causing this to have this problem in this area.
Right. Yes. Terrain theory definitely plays into helping explain, what homeopathy is doing. We're treating the overall susceptibility in that person that's allowing them, to be more susceptible to, like, say, a virus or whatever. So you look at, 5 people are exposed to the flu at the same time, but maybe only 2 get it. Well, you said it was contagious. There's this theory that, like, well, germs spread and it's going to go everywhere. But then what happens to the 3 people that didn't get it? They have a different terrain, and they are not as susceptible to that particular thing. Or maybe their body doesn't need that illness right now. Sometimes illness is actually a good thing, right? Because it's how our body cleanses itself from certain, like, maybe environmental toxins or things like that. But if you're not as susceptible, then that's not going to be even an issue for you. So with homeopathy, as we're working with someone's vital force, we're making them stronger in the way that they are going to be less susceptible to disease in general. So what we're doing is we're keeping the terrain clean. And then when things come in, their body is strong enough to just regulate that,
build up those good bacteria instead of just taking everything out. Like, prime example, why everybody that uses hand sanitizer gets sick all the time, and people that don't get sick nearly as often. It's because people don't understand. They think this idea about, like, all bacteria, all germs, they're all bad, kill them all off. But that's not the case. Like, most of them are good germs, and they're actually the things that'll make it so that you won't get sick from other things. But if you kill all these things off all the time, then you're basically creating this vacuum of a body that basically can't have anything come into it without having an issue, because it can't fight anything off, because you push everything off of it the second it comes on. It never develops that immunity to it, which I always have this argument with people about their kids and with my kids. I'm like, I may not make my kids use hand sanitizer every single time they go to the store or anything like that, but the whole idea is, like, I've taught them, don't touch your face if you're out in public. Before you eat, you wash your hands. But then you're exposed to these germs, but you're not directly putting them inside of your mouth. So it's like, wash your hands, but you don't need to use hand sanitizer every time you touch something, because those parents you see around the store that every single time their kid touches an aisle, they put hand sanitizer on them. Those kids are the ones that are sick every other week.
Right, because their immunity is not sampling, the what's going on in the collective at that point, that's helping strengthen their overall immune system, making them more susceptible to the disease in the end anyways. So
like I said, it's like that idea with honey too, that it's one of those repressed things that it's basically this cure-all for a bunch of stuff. I mean, one of which being, like, allergies, because if you get some local honey that particularly is from your area, that is giving you a little touch of all the plants that are in your area. So it's one of those things people just completely look over. But if you have allergies, it's one of, like, the top things that'll end up helping with allergies, but it's repressed. And, people will say, oh, eat some honey, but they're not specific. Like, it doesn't do the trick unless you get particularly, like, where you're from, your area's honey, because those are the plants around you. That's what you need. And then it'll make it so that you're immune all year.
Right. And that's actually playing on the like cures like, because you're introducing the pollens that are going around that's actually causing you to have these symptoms. But when you introduce them through the honey, you're actually, curing through like curing like, because you're like exposing yourself to the remedy that is also the cause. And, there's so many ways that when we're working with herbs and plants and things like that for healing, that we're also dabbling into the like curing like concept.
Man, I love diving into this type of stuff. I'm the one that's like, anytime there's any of the kids that have like an issue in the family, everybody's like prone to medicine. I'm like, oh yeah, try some honey with that. Oh, they got a stomachache, try this. Oh, they got this, try this. Like, it's always nice to find like-minded people when it comes to this stuff, because again, it's like people think it's super woo-woo, but once you actually start trying it for yourself, you realize that, like, you've been brainwashed your entire life. Like, there's a reason why this stuff is repressed and why it's intended to be looked at as some like woo-woo concept. It's because, Western medicine is going to lose money the second people realize that literally half the cures that they need are literally in their backyard. Like even walk around your backyard, all the little natural plants that you have that grow, like those are exactly what cure the problems you have in your area, but they don't want you to know that. Cover it up with grass.
Right. Yeah. We're disempowered when we're non-formed.
Like dandelions. I mean, that's another one. That's like everybody looks at it like it's one of the worst weeds on the planet, but I let them grow rampant in my yard because you can use them for ointments. You can use them for teas. You can use them to draw bugs into your yard, like the good bugs. Like they do a lot more good than they do negative, but they've tricked you into thinking that they're the super negative thing because they do so much good.
Right. And they detox the liver, which, is an incredible support. They'll tell people like there's no way to like reverse liver damage and things like that. And I'm like, dandelion could help a little bit,
We made a topical ointment with dandelions actually. And my son, when he was really little and still wearing a diaper, he had a problem where he'd get diaper rash all the time. And we tried Desitin, like all the name brand ones, all the organic ones, like everything we could possibly try. Nothing helped. And then we ended up getting connected in with Lainey from, it's been a while since I've talked to her. Trying to remember what the name of her project is, but I'll throw it into hopefully a future episode. But she ended up sending us a jar of this like dandelion ointment that she made, and literally the following day it completely cleared up his entire diaper rash. And that was the only thing that we used the rest of the time that he was in diapers, because it was the only thing that worked. And weirdly enough, everybody thinks extra strength, extra medicine, this is going to be the good stuff. No, it's literally the stuff that was made from the dandelions in the backyard that cleared it up overnight.
Right, absolutely. And calendula is another great herb for, any kind of rash or itchy, hivey.
Oh, I'm sure that was mixed in there too.
Yeah, it's a great balm for skin ailments. And it's similar in its homeopathic form, which is more potentized and diluted. It does similar things that it does in its just straight herbal form. So they, kind of overlap in a lot of ways.
Well, I guess this kind of led us into what we're hopefully going to talk about on the next conversation. We can take time to kind of narrow it down. We can dive into a bunch of these homeopathic cures, because I don't think I've had anybody on the show that's particularly just kind of dived into this stuff in particular, and maybe kind of threw some new options for people to try. So maybe that can be what we hit on the next episode, is kind of give people a good overall about how to kind of get into the whole wellness aspect from a different perspective.
Okay, yeah, I would love to talk about, homeopathy and flower essences more. They've completely changed my life, which is why I decided to learn more about them, because I was just like, I have to tell everybody about this. This is amazing.
Oh yeah, well, we'll set that up to make sure that happens sooner rather than later, because I'm sure the listeners are going to be waiting for it.
Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break. But if you enjoyed the show and you think I deserve it, then please leave a review or rating for this show on iTunes, Spotify, or any other podcatcher you happen to use. Your continued support is what makes this show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So thank you. Now feel free to skip past these ads so we can get back to the show. And we are back, so let's get back to it.
I guess to kind of wrap up the conversation today, I always like to end with some words of wisdom. So if there's any words of wisdom you might want to bestow on the listeners today, other than all the stuff that you've been sharing with them today, what might it be?
The phrase "you are always whole" is coming forward. So in every moment, you are complete and loved and whole. So
good words of wisdom to live by. And if anybody wanted to come and check out your podcast, any of the awesome work that you do, because I know you got a lot of different stuff going on, where can people come and find you on the internet, and where can people find the main bulk of your work?
So a great landing spot would be my website, astralmeadow.com. I have all the different things that I do on there. But if you want to follow my journey, my Instagram at Astral Meadows with an S, I post there pretty much every day, updates. I share art, my mystical poetry. I sing songs, share, some astrology. I do write-ups and things like that for, the current astrology that we're in that moment. So that's a great landing spot. On Facebook, you can follow my podcast, The Astral Hour, on there. And my podcast is streamed on all the major platforms. You can also find it on YouTube. Please go subscribe. I have the hardest time getting subscribers on YouTube, but and my new channel is called Is That Homeopathy? That launched yesterday, is also on YouTube, and it has more of a video format, so they can also look into that.
And I'll make sure that I include all those links down in the show description so everybody can find them quick and easy. And it's been a long time, but I really appreciate you making the time to come on today. And I'm really looking forward to diving into what we talked about we're going to dive into next time.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
If you guys enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, smash that follow icon and share today's episode with a friend. Grassroots support from listeners just like you guys is exactly how the show grows. So thank you. And if you'd like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can do so through email, which is inquiriesofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or through social media, Instagram and Facebook, or you guys can get a hold of me through the submission form, which of course is available off of the link tree. And the last way you guys can get a hold of me is through the hotline. You guys can text or call that, whatever is easier for you guys. And that number is 313-364-1551. And if you guys didn't catch that, it is available down in the show description. And if you guys have some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends of the show, I Know Squatch, Snarly Out Natural Products, Crypto Theology, and Big Ape Threads. And our friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on those is available down in the show notes. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available in the link tree, which is also available down in those show notes. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with Mike talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as the Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers.